Bird nerds. Hello, I'm Grant. I'm a bird nerd. I'm coming to you from Wurundjeri country in the western suburbs of Melbourne, and my guest today is from that amazing bogan town where they do good, it's either, what's Adelaide famous for? Crazy murders, right, from the 70s and 80s. The Beaumont children, which is potentially tied up with the whole crazy things, but also pie floaters. What more could you want? What more could you want? Saskia Gerhardy, who is a PhD candidate at the University of Adelaide, School of Biological Sciences or School of Biology, one of those, look it up. How are you, Saskia? Thanks for being with us on the Bird Emergency.
I'm really good. Thank you for having me on.
And, of course, we're talking about Australia's weirdest bird, I think, often referred to as Australia's oddest bird, the plains wanderer. Saskia, let's start with, what is the plains wanderer? In nearly every bird book that you pick up from the last 50, 70 years, it'll be on the same page or the page before or the page after quails.
Yeah.
How closely related is the plains wanderer to the quails? And actually, we've got true quails and button quails. Let's start with something easy.
You just get straight into the generic. Yeah, so plains wanderers are actually not related at all to any sort of quail, button or otherwise. They're a super unique species. Like you say, they're like one of these really odd-looking birds, and it's because they're really genetically unique. They're the only representative from their family. So when we classify animals, we've got genus, species, and family. So they're the only remaining birds from that family, and that family is actually closest related to shorebirds, not Australian shorebirds, South American shorebirds. So they're a really unusual bird with a really long genetic lineage that's got them here, and as a result they've got some really wacky sort of ways that they look and behave, so they're quite an unusual little species.
Yeah, I think, now, great danger talking off the top of my head over something that I think I read ages ago, but I think it's one of the oldest genetic lineages of any of the birds still, modern day birds still occurring in Australia. Is that really your understanding? Yeah.
I don't know if it's the oldest, but it is really old. I'd have to check my notes, but a couple million years is ringing a bell. Like, I know that they have really been in that family for a long time and evolved and adapted, during a lot of changes in Australia, which is, I guess one of the reasons they're so special, because they're such an unusual little creature. But I'd have to check up on the exact times and dates. But I know it's a really old family.
And supports the Pangea and Gondwana land evolutionary pathways, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And that songbirds evolved in Australia in that conglomerate mass rather than, as was presumed in the earlier years, that songbirds all were Northern Hemisphere and that they spread south. So really,
they're not songbirds. They're they're like quails and other sort of shorebirds. They don't fall into the sort of the passerines sort of family. Yeah, they're non-songbirds. They don't sing. They make the most really low ooming noise. It sounds more like a cow than anything. Yeah, certainly can't give them that tick. Don't sing well.
Okay, well, while I look something up, because I didn't even think to do this in advance, because I've been so preoccupied with whether America was going to implode into craziness, and thankfully it looks like it didn't. Tell me what the basic premise of your work, your PhD, is about, and I'll look something up. And
I'll entertain the audience while you read.
Talk among yourselves.
Yeah, so my research is about plains wanderers in South Australia. A lot of the research that's come out of plains wanderers has been based in Victoria and New South Wales. You had a chat to Dan a few years ago talking about his research there. So a lot of what we know is based off those two strongholds in those two states. And then the birds that we have here in South Australia are in a lot fewer numbers and acting a little bit different. They have different behavioural and habitat specifications. So we're looking into that. So my project's based into 4 parts. We're looking to begin with to improve monitoring techniques. So these are a highly cryptic little bird. They're really difficult to find. And when we have such a small population like the one in South Australia, trying to maximise survey effort is really important. So that's one part of it. We're trying to understand the vegetation that they're living in here in South Australia, trying to understand a bit more about their threats and their sort of behavioural adaptations to these threats. And then my last chapter, hang on, I'm trying to think what my last chapter is. looking at the status and distribution here in South Australia. So the last study of plains wanderers here in SA was done in like the 90s, and we haven't really done a lot of study on them here since. So we don't really know where these birds are existing, whether they're still in their old ranges, whether they've moved into new ranges, or whether we've just lost them from a lot of these areas. So in a nutshell, that's what I'm trying to work out.
Okay, so if I heard you right, there's some historical information about where they did occur and a guesstimate of the numbers. Now, if we were to try and have a distribution map or an estimate of population in South Australia, those things just are unknown reliably.
We just don't know.
Yeah.
So plains wanderers were first described in South Australia. So like Gould back in the 1800s first described plains wanderers here in the Adelaide Plains. So they used to live quite regularly around the plains of Adelaide, but obviously as that sort of started to build up and urbanise, we lost the birds from those areas. We used to get them in the York and Eyre peninsulas and up through parts of the and now it's hard to tell because there's not the targeted surveys in those areas, so we don't know whether those birds are truly lost from those areas or whether we just don't have the survey efforts there to let us know about their population numbers. So at the moment, our best guess population comes from a couple of anecdotal sightings, a bit of the research that I'm doing, and just some general guesswork. So it's to help us manage the species better, it's going to be important for us to help work out where they are and what they're doing and where they're still existing.
So is there a conservation listing in South Australia as endangered or
critically endangered? Yeah,
critically endangered in SA, and that's based on that it was historically recorded.
Yeah.
When's the last reliable sighting in South Australia or in any of what's the most westerly reliable sighting, say, in the last 10 years?
Westerly would be there was a sighting about 4 years ago in the Nullarbor, which is, if you know your geography in South Australia, that's about as far west as you can get before you hit Western Australia. When it was, and it's unusual because a lot of the distribution maps suggest that Adelaide was the most western edge of their range. So then to get one all the way out there is quite unusual. And like I say, there's little follow-up at the moment. So we don't know whether that sighting is a one-off or whether there's populations there or whether they're migrating out there or just one of the birds caught the wind and got himself a bit lost. They're quite unusual in their occurrences here in SA. They just pop up in really random spots and we don't really know when or why or how.
Okay, I'm just looking down at my Australian Bird Guide distribution map, and there seems to be one spot near-ish to Alice Springs, then the sort of three-corner country, the Channel country, then running continuously down through the Murray into that central southwest New South Wales, Victoria, and down into, it's hard to tell on this map, but I would assume the west of Melbourne, but it looks like it's maybe even going a little bit east of Melbourne.
So that's sort of their own range,
Yeah, I'm surprised I can't see a dot for the Nullarbor. Now, that's such sparsely populated country. Would you err on the side that there's probably more plains wanderers filling in that sparse country rather than the pessimistic view that they're probably not there because we don't have any records? As a scientist, I know you're probably going to be unwilling to jump into it, but are you an optimist or a pessimist?
I think with the Western populations, I would probably suggest those are more birds that have just got themselves a bit lost. But I think with the ones that we have in South Australia, so in that sort of map that you described, we have a lot of the sort of northeastern pastoral districts of South Australia. I think there's a lot more birds in there than what we assume. We've only really scratched the surface as far as areas that we've assessed for plains wanderers and found plains wanderers on. So I would suggest that, there's probably still a lot more birds in those areas. I know there's some research happening in the York and Eyre peninsulas about trying to detect plains wanderers there, and people feel pretty confident that they're still existing there. So, I think a lot of the reason that we say South Australia isn't one of these sort of stronghold populations or contributes a lot to the larger population is just a huge lack of research.
Okay. That record on the Nullarbor, was that on public land or was that on private land? Do you know?
I'll have to double check. From the top of my head, I think it was private land. I think there was a group of people doing surveys for something unrelated. I think it was a vegetation survey or something, and a trusted saw one and went, oh my goodness, what are you doing here? Yeah, and it's all been like published in like the Rare Birds Committee and whatnot as a confirmed sighting. So we're pretty, we feel confident that they were there. Whether they're still there or exist there in a permanent situation, we're not too sure yet.
Now, let's share what I wanted to share, because you did mention, hopefully people are going to be able to hear this. This is from one of my favourite resources on the internet, xenocanto.org, where people upload their recordings of bird calls, and we're going to hear. Let me just put we're in. Let's make sure that's there. We don't want to mute the audio, so let's hear the Plains Wanderer. So it was hard to hear above the insects, but I might run it again. It's like the wonga pigeon or that booming.
It sounds like a bronzewing quite regularly.
Yeah, it does. Okay, and that was at Deniliquin. Thanks, Frank Lambert, for recording that and popping that up. That's from 2015 in Deniliquin. So thanks very much for doing that, Frank. I think it's really great when people share what they know and what they hear. Often with really endangered birds, the calls aren't shared because people go out there and do the wrong thing and try and lure them in and for their photography or whatnot. That's bad. So let's just get that out there. Don't do that. I've made the point before, Saskia. If you're sitting there with a recording of a bird call, especially if it's a territorial or a contact bird call, what you're essentially doing is just going to the front door and bashing on it incessantly. That's what you're doing. It's like, oh, I'm here, pay me attention. That's not good for anyone's mental health, and I'm pretty sure that the Plains Wanderer would not appreciate it. So don't do it. Get out there with your binoculars, though, or your long lens on your camera.
Yeah.
Have you been out spotting, looking for the Plains Wanderer?
Yeah, so we just finished up our field season a couple of weeks ago. So we spent quite a few long nights out looking for plains wanderers. We don't spotlight like they do in the eastern states. We've started using thermal technology. Plains wanderers, like I mentioned before, are a highly cryptic bird. They're really hard to see. If you're going out during the day, you've basically got no chance of seeing them. I'll be working in areas I know a plains wanderer is in and still won't be able to find that. But at night time, using a thermal image, you can get a really nice contrast and be able to pick up the heat signature of the bird. So we use that, and it's been fantastic. It's a really great way for us to survey the birds and, try and find them. And it's, led us to, find quite a few more than we thought were out in some of the properties originally, which has been really exciting.
Obviously, that's far less intrusive for the birds. Again, going slightly off topic, but it's related to studying critically endangered cryptic birds that might be really susceptible to disturbance. Do you think that when a study now goes through ethical approval that there might be a shift towards using thermal imagery rather than any other techniques, and maybe just soundscape techniques?
Yeah, I definitely, as an ethical perspective, I think it's definitely an improvement. We've been able to observe males incubating chicks without disturbing them. You don't need to go up and look at them. You can just see them from the car and you can just leave them alone, which has been excellent. It also just improves the capability of seeing these birds. We did a couple of trials where we'd have a spotlight out one side of the car and the thermal out the other. And I think the spotlight picked up one bird out of the whole field season. So the thermal's certainly superior in detecting these animals. And I think when you're talking about critically endangered birds and you want to get this sort of detection up as high as possible to understand the population numbers, it's important to use that sort of tech. So I've seen it being started to use on things like gulls, and I think it's been used on bilbies. So I think it will be something that we'll start seeing a lot more of in science. I think that's really exciting. It's cool to see these new technologies being embraced by the scientific community.
How does that methodology using the heat-seeking technology stack up against the more traditional methods in terms of cost and reliability for nocturnal birds? I mean, have you got enough information about the Plains Wanderer with your study yet to know if it is a better method compared to the studies you've been able to look at in maybe the last 10 years that have occurred?
As far as my study is concerned, it's definitely improved our detection capability. So before I started this study, there was this great little anecdote that sort of said if you're using spotlights and if you're using them in Victoria or New South Wales in the strongholds of plains wanderers, 2 hours or so before you find a plains wanderer. And then if you do that in South Australia, in my main study site, which is called Boolcoomatta Station, was 40 hours before you see a plains wanderer. So when you're looking for a bird that's not in quite as many numbers, we need to get that one up on them in any way possible. And we definitely found that the thermal was a good way to do that. So that's, it's been a great thing for us.
So can I just stop you there, because I want to talk about that 40 hours. Is that 40 hours in your study or 40 hours in the earlier studies in South Australia?
Earlier studies, yeah.
So how much did the thermal imaging bring it down? What's your hit rate now in terms of hours?
Yeah, so it's hard to tell because we've had a boom year, so we had a lot more birds, but we were finding birds within the 30 minutes to an hour using superior. Yeah.
But is it a boom year, or is it just that the previous studies have not been able to detect the birds because of the methodology of the study? That's the interesting thing, isn't it?
It's the really tricky thing here in South Australia. So this study that I'm doing is really forming a bit of the baseline of what we know of birds, especially in the northeast pasture. So it's really hard to make these sort of assumptions and say, it's because the thermal's superior or it's because it's a boom year. We don't know. We're hoping over the next few years to get a better idea of it. Obviously, we're coming out of this La Nina, so we're assuming that things will start to dry and perhaps the population will start to increase again. But, like you say, it's hard to know. We don't know whether these populations have always been established here or whether, they've just come because of the weather. So, time will tell.
I want to talk about the bird, the habits a bit more in a little bit, but first, let's get some comments up too while we're there. 30 minutes, yes. Wonder Llama can't believe that. That's great. There we are. Llama, that comment took all night in 1987. That infers that you've been doing studies on the plains wanderer. Use the comments. Tell us your 1987 history. 87, I'm guessing that would have been about Miss Free Love Hoodoo Guru's time frame. Llama's probably as old as me. Let's see. I'll see if I'm right in a minute. Saskia, what kind of habitat are you likely to find the plains wanderer in? And as an extension to that, is its occurrence really closely linked to any particular vegetation, either species or just, that's a good scientific term, isn't it? Vegetation type.
No, but it's a really good question, and it's like one of the most exciting things I think personally about the South Australian population. So in Victoria and New South Wales, the plains wanderers are grassland specialists. So they live primarily in grasslands. That's what they're known for. Where we're finding them here, not a blade of grass, like nothing. We're not even talking tussocks or anything. It's a really open plains that you'd be, struggling to call it a grassland. It's dominated by a species called sclerolina, which is just a prickle bush, basically. It's a very low prickle bush, and that's where they're living in. So it's really interesting to have this bird that's been classified as a specialist living very much in habitat which is you'd very much call unideal. Plains wanderers are sometimes referred to, you might have heard them be called like the Goldilocks bird. They're super picky. They don't want their grasslands too dense or too sparse. It has to be just right. And we're finding them nowhere in this just right. So it's quite exciting for us because we're wondering whether these birds are more adaptable than what we first thought, whether where they're living is just really marginal to them and they're just living on what's left, or whether, they can use a variety of different ranges and resources. So that's been one of the more exciting parts of this project, is trying to work out what on earth they're doing here in South Australia and why this specialist is living in very much not grassland.
But see, I want to be nitpicky again, and I think this highlights part of the problem that we have when there is very little funding for ongoing surveys and counts, okay? And depending on who does the work and writes the paper, sometimes the wrong conclusions are drawn. Now, you've just told us about where you are finding plains wanderers in South Australia. Might mean that all of the other conclusions have been drawn out of expectations rather than actual drawing any firm link between any vegetation whatsoever.
It's really hard to know. Like a lot of, in the 80s, a lot of sort of plains wanderer preferred habitat is sort of this grassland matrix. They're really picky. Like in these sort of areas, you've got this formula. It's like 50% bare ground, 40% grasses. The grasses need to be like think it's no more than 30 centimetres high and 30 centimetres away from each other. Like, it's a really precise formula. And a lot of that grassland was preserved for plains wanderer habitat and managed to keep that sort of that open grassland structure. And that's where a lot of those sort of surveys had. So it's hard to know whether those birds are that's just where those birds are living in those regions and that's their preferred habitat there, or whether the birds we have in South Australia maybe they never lived in grasslands, or maybe because the grazing that we've had in the northeast pastoral district has been historically quite intense, so we've lost the grasslands, the birds are still living in what was preferable habitat but is no longer. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the exciting and difficult thing about science. There's a lot of questions and sometimes it's hard to pull an answer when you have just a small data set. But yeah, it's certainly something that we're working to answer over the coming years.
So what was the genus that you said? Was it Sclerotina?
Sclerolina.
Sclerolina. Okay, I'm just going to get it up so that I can...
If yourself or any of your listeners have spent any time in the arid lands, it's the prickle that you're constantly pulling out of your socks. It's like this sort of, usually a two sort of prong pull. It's just stuck everywhere. It's a pain, and nasty thing. And
is it Divericata or...
Divericata is the association that they live in, yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so let me just pull that up so that we can... Tangled Bassia, or otherwise known in some parts of the country as Bindi.
It gets called copperbird quite a bit as well, if that gives you any indication as to the nasty sort of plant it is.
Yeah, and of course, here we are, I'll just pull it up. So it's... common in Victoria and South Australia. I'll just pull it up and see if we can get a picture, and I'll share that. Gee, I'm not having much luck with this mouse today. Come on. Here we are. Specimen images. There we go. Ah, yes, it's got that 3 barb. Okay, let's share this. Sorry for everyone who's just following along, but I think this is important to be able to see what we're talking about, and it will support my next comment, I think. Okay, let's full screen that.
Yeah, so that gives you a good idea of the prickles that they've got there. And then if you can see veg, it's quite a short, shrubby sort of plant. Usually probably doesn't sit much higher than 30 to 40 centimetres. And, yeah, this is where we find plains wanderers.
And so that's going to be and it's quite fleshy too, by the look of it.
When it's lush, when there's rain. If there hasn't been rain, it looks a bit, gnarly and dried and, a bit, nasty.
So looking at that image, as you say, it would struggle to get higher than knee high. Okay?
Yeah.
I would think. So there's the wicked spines and the fleshiness. Let's just scroll through a couple of those. Often the association is made that it's tied to particular grasses, and maybe someone might be talking about Themidas, the kangaroo grass, or maybe Danthonias, the wallaby grass, or maybe in other habitats people have tied other birds and other animals to spinifex. But it may just be ever plant occupies that ecological niche. As long as they're present, the bird might be able to hang on. And the other factors might be rainfall or even insects that are occurring. I don't know, but I think we've always assumed that the association was really with maybe the seed load or something like that.
And that's sort of one of the questions. So like, as you saw from the seeds there, they're not edible. And they're a plant that colonise that area really well because it's a really hardy sort of seed. So when you have this sort of heavy grazing or you have these sort of bust years where you have significant drought, those seeds can stay in the soil and survive for a really long time. So they're usually these coloniser plants. But the seeds aren't really palatable. Something like a plains wanderer wouldn't be able to get into it. So when we think of plains wanderers, we know that a lot of their diet's made up from like grass seeds. So one of the interesting questions we're looking at here is what are these birds eating out here? We assume it must be mainly insect driven, but we don't know. Yeah, we'll still have to analyse that data.
Yeah, because I think that's another assumption that's been made is that they were omnivores, grass eaters, grass seed eaters, whereas they may be far more omnivorous than has been assumed. And we find
them with a lot of flowering plants. So when we do have these sort of rain events come through, obviously the more arid lands, we get this huge abundance of flowering herbs. When we get that, we tend to find plains wanderers around that. And we assume that's because that's bringing more insects in. So it'll be interesting to see. And a lot of the data I'm talking about is very early. So
but that's the whole point.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's the whole point of having a nice long conversation, because we can tease it out.
Yeah.
When you say flowering herbs, are you talking about Asteraceae, which are like the daisy family plants, or is it Lamiaceae, which is more down that sage kind of family? What are the seeds? Actually, you're not, I'm assuming, I'm jumping ahead to where I wanted to talk about methodology again, but you're not collecting specimens of plains wanderers and cutting them open like happens for the seabird trials with plastic or whatever. So how are you determining what the birds are eating? Is it only from watching them, or is it from fecal matter? How are you doing it?
Yeah, so this is where biology gets really charming. So I spend a lot of my field days picking up plains wanderer poos. So you'll be, when we're catching these birds and banding them, one will explosive poo all over you, and most people will be like, ugh, but I'm like, yes, get a swab, quick, we're going to collect this. Yeah, we're looking at a scat analysis to try and work out what they're eating. We also tracked a number of birds over the past spring, so we put these little tracking GPS harnesses on our birds, so we got a really good idea of the home range of those birds, and then we're able to then go and do vegetation surveys in those areas and get an idea of what veg was present while the birds were there, and then they're spending a lot of their time foraging. We're able to try and work out what plant species were preferable in those areas. So, yeah, that's how we've tried to work out a lot of that. And then a lot of the flowering things are, like you say, those little daisies. We get, a range of peas that sort of just pop up when we have these rain events. The Northeast Pastoral is a very boom-bust cycle. So when you have these good events, it's magic. You'll have rain. You can't get out for 2 days because it's completely just the plains are just a mess. By the time you can get up, everything's in flower. Like, it just happens in front of your eyes. It's incredible. So, yeah, lots of little flowering bits and pieces, especially at the moment. Yeah. When
you take a fecal swab or collect, is scat the right term?
Yes, that's the term we use. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So, what information are you able to collect, or are you collect? Is it basically dietary information, or are you also getting things like parasite loads and things like that as well? How extensive is the analysis that you're able to do?
Yeah, so the analysis we're looking at is just dietary. So we collect this swab, and then you can run it genetically with known samples and look for matches. So if I know that X, Y, and Z plant is available at the time I collected the swab, we can then run it against those plants and see if they match. So then you can try and work out, if you say, oh, yes, that plant was present in the scat, it ate that plant. And then you can do similar work with insects. So you can say, these are the insects that we caught in insect traps while we're out there. We can run them against the scat, the genetics of that scat, to try and work out what was present in there. Yeah, there's a lot you can answer with genetics. We're not looking down to the gut microbial stuff just yet, but it's definitely something that we've talked about and thought about, especially with captive birds versus wild birds, whether so that gut microbe is really important, what sort of elements are in there, and how we can try and best support our both captive and wild populations.
Okay, just wondering where best to go next. Let's talk about the genetic information that you've been able to gather. What have those results told you about the diversity of the wild population that you are familiar with compared to the captive population? And that's the captive population at Monarto. Is that right?
Yeah, there's a number of captive populations throughout Australia. So there's a few.
Okay, so you're comparing against all of the known genetic material. Okay.
You're probably about 2 months too early. We've just sent our genetic samples off to be analysed. So we collected 60 or so samples during our last field season. So we've just sent them off to be run. Before that, we only had, I think it was 2 or 3 samples that were analysed in the sort of the genetic program that the Plains Wanderer Recovery team is currently supporting. So their genetics is really, it's quite interesting because we'd expect speciation, we'd sort of expect the South Australian population, the New South Wales population, the captive population they keep to themselves. They have a clustering effect when you analyse it. But what we find is it's just a big melting pot. Like, the South Australian birds are just as related to the captive birds as they are the New South Wales birds. So it's just this sort of big melting pot in there. There's no sort of speciation happening. And we don't know if that's a result of the fact that these birds just aren't showing changes in their genetic makeup, or whether it's because they're a really mobile population. So birds come to South Australia, go to Queensland, come back again. So it does open a bit of a can of worms.
So I was waiting to bring up this comment or question.
Yeah.
And I was waiting for that because I knew we'd go there. How far do individuals tend to wander? And that's one of the great unknowns, isn't it? That
certainly, yeah.
If that speciation is not occurring, so that we're not getting a Queensland race and a South Australian race and a Victorian race, the assumption that will have to be tested against all the genetic information in the coming years is that maybe these birds do disperse very widely, and that's so maybe it's not unusual for birds to pop up from anywhere, and that they may have come from.
Yeah, so there's sort of two parts that I can try and answer that question. So we just did a big tracking event, a couple of months ago, putting GPS trackers on birds. So we had 10 out there that we were tracking.
Just let me stop there. Are they harnesses or are they leg flags?
No harnesses, so they're wearing like a backpack. They've got a VHF, which is a very high-frequency transmitter. That's the one that sort of David Attenborough, and you've got the scientists out with their radio tracker. That's that one. And then it's got a GPS on it, which is talking to a satellite, which just logs the location of that bird accurate to a metre or so out in the plains. So I just did a heap of that collection, kind of analysed that data, and most of the birds had incredibly small home ranges, which is quite unusual. We were expecting them to have really big ranges. But they were staying quite close to where we'd caught them. We're assuming that this is because, again, conditions are really good at the moment. So following that theory that when resources are high, a bird doesn't need to extend extra energy to move further. If it can get like a good seed stock, like just to its left, it's not going to move kilometres if it doesn't need to. So we're assuming there. But I tracked one female, and she was just on a little adventure. Like she just, every day she'd move like another 500 metres, and she was probably like 2 to 3 Ks away from where I originally caught her. So they definitely wander far. I know the Victorian team have quite a few instances where they'll be tracking birds and they'll just disappear. They'll put drones out and those birds are gone. And if we think of Chuka now, where there's quite a good plains-wanderer population, as you may know from watching the news, that Chuka's pretty much underwater at the moment. We don't know where those birds have gone. We assume they're somewhere, but we don't quite know yet. So there's a lot that we don't know about wandering behaviour.
And not only is Echuca underwater, but so much of the known habitat in Victoria and New South Wales has been underwater in the last couple of months, and in the last year, maybe a couple of times. So dispersal almost is a no-brainer. Maybe it's only the females and not the males, because let's talk about their habits. Polyamorous, right?
Yeah, so not faithful birds. The female certainly isn't anyway. So she, like I say, they're from their own family. They have these unusual character traits. This is one of them. It's like Emu. She rules the roost. Like it's a ladies' world out in the plains are there. She'll call them for a male. She'll attract a male into her range, which she manages. She'll lay eggs, and then he'll go and incubate the eggs, and she'll head off in the next territory and go find another fella. So, they're quite an unusual bird with that behaviour. It's certainly not something you usually see. And then their coloration reflects that. So the beautiful pictures that you see of this upright bird with a speckly neck and the big red patch on it, that's the female. She's the really big bird that's quite showy. And then the males, he looks like half her size. They're usually like half the weight as well. A lot of pictures that I've shown people, they're like, "Oh, is that the chick?" No, that's her fella. Like they're really quite small, and it's the dimorphism with the birds is quite incredible.
Compared to say a bantam, say a jungle bantam, I think most people know that kind of chicken. How do they compare in size?
Smaller. They're kind of think. They're like the biggest females I'll get like 90 grams. So we kind of think like a plover. Like they're small. Yeah, they're little birds.
Think dotterel rather than
sorry, I meant
like a hoodie. So it's just that common name thing, isn't it? Because the masked lapwing, which old people like me think of as a plover, they're way bigger. Way bigger.
So at the smaller end of it. People are quite usually shocked. When I certainly first saw pictures of them, I was thinking, like lapwing size. They look like a sturdy big bird, but they're tiny little things. And I guess that's half the reason they're so cryptic. They're quite small the way they get around through a landscape.
Let's talk shorebirds just a little bit in comparison. Redneck stint, kind of size?
Yeah, I think that probably be a fairly good comparison. Yeah,
Okay,
they're small. Yeah, I can hold one in my hands, like quite tiny little things. Yeah,
and that's the danger with collecting all your information as a birder from photographs. You would think that they are bigger, but they are.
They have a big presence. Yeah.
Now, the male does all the husbandry duties.
Does.
Do we know enough about what the females get up to? Are they mating with several males, perhaps over many territories? Is there enough information to know that?
There's not. That's the assumption. There's really not a lot known about their breeding habits except for what happens in captive environments, which of course is highly modified. Like we're putting captive birds together that we want to breed for genetic richness and whatnot. So there's not a huge amount known about their wild habits, but the assumption is that, a female will move into multiple territories, especially in boom season. She'll just try and get as many clutches out as possible. Perhaps when seasons are a little bit more, like resources aren't quite as rich, we think maybe that cycle slows down a little bit. But like I say, not enough data yet to know for sure.
Yeah. Based on the quantity, the quantum of data that you're able to get using the current methods, how many times, how many years or how many seasons do you think a survey like yours will need to be repeated to be able to confidently talk about numbers and perhaps gather some of that information about what the females are really doing rather than being assumed to be doing?
Yeah, I think, and it is such a numbers game, I think multiple years is needed and multiple years during different seasonalities. So we've collected some nice little data sets during a La Nina year. It's been beautiful out of the plains. They're unrecognisable. They just look spectacular. Things are doing well. Plains wanderers are doing well. But then we need data sets with when things aren't doing so well. So like in Victoria at the moment, we're too much rain for plains wanderers. And then a few years ago out at my field sites, it was banks in the middle of a drought. So it was really horrendous for them there. So I think it's important to have a really rich data set of all those times. And then, the populations are so variable within that. And we don't know if it's because they're moving or because when we have these poor conditions, whether the population does decline. So, I think to manage these birds efficiently, there's, so much more work that we need to do on them.
Now, when you're actually capturing birds, so you're misnetting, I'm guessing?
No.
Okay. Okay, so there's a couple of questions. So you can go through the whole lot. How are you capturing them? Then you're taking fecal swabs and weighing and whatnot. I'm assuming that you're banding as well as putting a harness on. If somebody is an avid bird watcher, is the information publicly available about what colour rings or whatever, anything like that you are attaching, so that somebody who sees one, if they're a skilled birder, can they report what they see? Is there actually a way for them to do that now?
Yeah, a few questions there. I'll try and start.
But I think they're all logically linked.
So to catch plains wanderers is an absolute dream. So we don't need to misnet them. Like I was saying before, we thermal image. So we'll go out and try and find a plains wanderer. When we're driving along and we see this little glowing blob that we say, that looks like a good bird, we'll hop out with a fishing net and walk very slowly up to them, and you can just place the net on top of them. These guys have very poor predator defense methods, so they just kind of like bunker down. You've seen like curlew pictures where they like lie on the ground. They look quite intense. That's similar to what a plains wanderer does. So I usually say to anyone, like any field workers with me, I'm like, finding them's the hard bit. Once we've got there, everyone can just take a breather. Once you've seen the bird on the thermal, we're pretty much going to catch it unless something happens. So they're a dream to try and catch. Just finding them's the tricky bit. And then once we catch them, we take them back we've got a field processing kit in the back of my ute, and we go through all those sort of processes there. So we'll weigh the bird, collect genetic samples via feathers. We'll take a fecal swab, leg band, like you mentioned. And then if we're sort of doing a tracking study, we'll put the tracker on the bird if it's a correct weight. And so we can go through that. The leg bands that we're putting on the birds, and I believe this is the same as what the Victorian and New South Wales team is doing. We're not colour banding like a lot of these projects do. We just have a unique aluminium band. So every bird in Australia that's banded has a unique number that is unique exactly to that bird. So no other bird will have that. Yeah. So if you were to take
the only way to identify individuals is to recapture the bird from a casual observation.
Yeah, that's how we do it. You can see the band. You'd be hard-pressed to see the number, but it's enough for us at this point just to see recaptured birds. Yeah. It's hard to try and manage the numbers that way because we don't know what sort of numbers we're working with. So, the leg band number has been enough for us. And, the Australian Bird Banding Authority, the one that manages that. So they know every bird that I've banded down to the sex, weight, size, and then so you can send them, I found B124 or whatever, and they'll say, oh, that's Saskia Plains Wanderer, it was first caught and it was this weight and whatnot. So, there's a lot of things like programs like that really help bird banders and help us try and get understanding of our data and where our birds are off to.
I love that ABBA is involved. It's always good.
Yeah, ABBA, yeah.
So you don't take any blood work when you capture them? No blood samples?
Not at the moment. We're probably going to start looking at that for genetics, but at the moment feather samples has been enough. So if you pluck a fresh feather, the tip there has enough genetic sample in it for us to work with. Any sort of shed feathers, usually not, because they're usually older and the DNA is degrading. But a fresh plucked feather, we pull it sort of from the flank of the bird. So if you imagine, I guess, the armpit of it.
The underwing.
Yeah, under the wing, like under its leg. So kind of like fluffy bits that come out there. Yeah, so we just pluck a few feathers out of there and then, just put that on ice and send it off to the genetics team that sort of process that for us. So, and we're really excited to actually see how that all goes. Like I mentioned before, we've not had a huge amount of South Australian birds included in the genetic sample, so we'll be really keen to see whether they do just fit in that melting pot or whether they are a bit different.
Okay, regular reminder for those watching now, if you've got a question that if I'm not covering something you want to know, just pop it in and I'll bring it up. Saskia, how many individuals have you been working with in the population? How many birds do you know?
And that's $1 million question. So we've banded 33, which we were really excited about. I then went out without banding tools and equipment and whatnot, and we found quite a significant number more. We also, when we're out banding, we found a number of males on chicks, so we don't touch males that are incubating, and we certainly don't band the chicks. So we don't have, because they're not all banded, we can't say 100% for sure, but we are imagining the numbers sort of 50 plus, which is and perhaps even more again, which is really exciting because there was only meant to be 100 or so between South Australia, Queensland and the periphery populations of New South Wales. So to think that we've got that many on a pretty small sort of section of properties makes you do wonder how many are actually about and whether, the population is doing well out here, a bit better than we first thought.
And how many have you been able to pop a harness on?
I tracked 10 for my last project. So this was one of those things where you just beat yourself up. When we first started doing recce's out at the site I'm working on, we were finding like a bird or two where there was not many out there. So we thought if we could get 5 birds tracked, happy days. So that was enough for us. We didn't realize we were going to find the amount that we did. So we didn't get enough harnesses. So we had to do a double whammy. So we finished one batch, took them all off and then did another batch again. In my perfect world, probably would have been good to do a few more, but we're aiming to head out again on another field season next year when it cools down a bit out there to, try and get a few more track because, the more we can understand about their home range, the better. Okay.
This is a question so that people who aren't involved in scientific research can get an idea of what is involved. So we briefly touched on getting ethical approval. So you've got to go through your faculty, through the university to get someone to tick off that one that it's not cruel and that it's not going to damage the birds in any way, the research that you do. Do you have to demonstrate to anybody other than your supervisor that the work is worthwhile, for want of a better term?
So especially when you work with a critically endangered bird, there are a few hoops you need to jump through, and I think that is a really good thing. I think that should happen. You don't want just any Joe Blow or cowboys out there just doing what they want with endangered animals. Certainly the ethics and the school needs a lot of input and to understand what you're doing. I work really closely with the Plains Wanderer Recovery Team, which is a program set up with a lot of the zoos, a lot of the researchers and scientists that are working on plains wanderers.
Who's the chair of that now? Just so if anyone wants to look it up. Who's your inside contact on the recovery?
My supervisor is on the panel. I can't think who's the chair at the moment. There's a number of key players in there. People like Dave Parker and David Baker-Gabb and whatnot, the key names in some of the research that's being done on plains wanderers at the moment. So they're certainly on the panel, and they have a lot of input as to what work they'd like to see done in South Australia and what work they're happy to support. They were really great in helping me out to train how to handle and work with plains wanderers. So that sort of needs to happen. Zoos get a say in how captive birds are being treated. There's a number of different departments. Obviously, we have have to have a scientific research permit, so that's separate to the ethics to say that I'll be doing research on South Australian land. I need to get something from, we call it DEW, Department of Environment and Water. I think there's a different jurisdiction in each state, but they need to sign off on that work as well. And then, of course, Bush Heritage, which is the organisation I do a lot of my work through. They approve some of the work I do as well. So, it's never-ending paperwork out here. Field work it's usually prefaced by quite a lot of background work and a lot of paperwork and whatnot. But, I think it's a frustrating process, but I think it is definitely worthwhile, and good that we have those standards in place.
And it looks like the last update to the recovery plan was published update. I'm sure there's plenty of work being done internally, but was 2016, is that?
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, so I think that was the last time that I've reviewed
That's what's up on the website anyway. Yeah, so that's cool. Now, there's a question coming up in a minute, which we'll get to, so sit tight, Llama. I'm seeing it. But before we do that, can you tell us a bit about the primary site that you've been working on and the linkage with Bush Heritage Australia so that we can talk a bit more about the global work that they're doing at the...
So the site I work on is called Station Reserve. It's an ex-pastoral property that Bush Heritage has bought the pastoral lease for. So they manage and run that station as a conservation reserve. And that's sort of Bush Heritage's, that's their gig. They buy up important parts of land in sort of Australia, usually significant properties either for size, species, in context of making bigger environmental impact, and they manage them in a way that promotes conservation. So the one that I'm working on, Boolcoomatta, was purchased because of plains wanderer abundance. That was one of the key reasons that they wanted to buy that. It's been identified as an international bird area of significance, so IB. So that was one of the reasons that they were pretty keen to get that and to manage it. Yeah, so that's how they run those programs.
And where is it? Give us an idea graphically where it is.
So it fits in what we call as like the northeast pastoral district in the semi-arid ranges of South Australia. So if you think of South Australia as a map, it's in the northeast corner there, very close to Broken Hill on the South Australian side. Yeah, Broken Hill's close to town, but it fits into, there's a network of properties out there. The way that sort of South Australian land out there is owned is people don't own that land, they own the pastoral lease, and it's usually mainly used for stocking and cropping and whatnot. Yeah, so it's part of those properties, those networks up there. And quite a big property. Off the top of my head, I think it's 64,000 hectares or something like that. And it takes up the plains where plains wanderers live, and then it also has a lot of rangeland on the more western side.
So we'll just get the info up there so that people can see what the landscape looks like and some of the other... Oh, actually, there we go, Mad Max 2. Just an hour away from where Mad Max 2 was.
That's probably the way to describe what the plains look like. If you've seen Mad Max, it's, that real barren open landscape. Yeah,
and just to talk about some of the vegetation communities, as I was talking about earlier, mulga woodland, bullock bush shrubland, freshwater wetlands and river redgum woodlands. Most of the plants that are being protected are vulnerable, so there's some peas, a wattle, a bellfruit, flax lilies, wilga, which is a wattle, broomrape, and the Broughton pea. So that gives you an idea what's there. But in the animals, birds, plains wanderer, white-winged fairy wrens, chirruping wedgebills, chestnut-crowned babblers, singing and spiny-cheeked honeyeaters, and the Australian pipit, nankeen or Australian kestrels, wedge-tailed eagles, masked wood swallows, orange and crimson chats, zebra finches, budgerigars, cockatiels, brown and rufous songlarks. So deserty without being that sandy desert people often associate with, but in the Australian context, it's that typical dry country. Mulga and wilga would be the two sort of common words associated with that country, I think.
Yeah. We also get we call it like the Kenopod Plains, so those blue bush and salt bush plains. That's another important area for plains wanderers in particular. But it's very much
and they're areas that will flood, aren't they? That it really, not terribly regularly, but
they're pretty flooded at the moment.
Yeah, that's right.
The poor reserve manager out there, I have to give a big shout out to him. He pulled me out of a few bogs this past field season. It is certainly pretty muddy and has had quite a bit of water on it over the past couple of months, that's for sure.
Oh, I missed that there's emus out there as well. So are we allowed? We're probably allowed. This is Bush Heritage video, so let's let that run, which will explain more about what Bush Heritage are doing. And no doubt there'll be some threads to pick up, and then we'll get to the point that my ageing friend Llama has talked about as well. So now you can hear the audio, Saskia?
I can hear the audio, yes.
Good. Okay, so let's...
We don't want to see the plains wanderer go extinct. Australia has a very sorry history of mammal extinctions, the worst in the world, and we've got a lot of our fauna under equal threat. We can't afford to lose any more, not without putting up a big fight. If I ask somebody in the street what a plains wanderer was, it's more than likely they're not going to have any idea. They're a very cryptic bird, rarely seen, and they don't make the headlines.
A plains wanderer is about 15 centimetres. They're quail-like, but they're not actually related to quails. They're their own family, so they're a really unique little critter. They're found in grassland habitat throughout Victoria and New South Wales and into South Australia.
Plains wanderers do live here on Boolcoomatta. In dry times, anecdotal evidence suggests that they do move on, and in the good seasons they will come back again. Boolcoomatta can provide a home for plains wanderers into the future. It does require a really good knowledge of how they utilise their habitat. The song meters installed on Boolcoomatta are being used to work out how plains wanderers utilise the reserve.
A song meter is a small device that has microphones, and it can be programmed to record a frequency of a known target species. So in this instance, we're using it to monitor plains wanderers. The females have a call during breeding season that's at a particular frequency, and so we set these song meters up at the prime time for females calling, and it's a really non-invasive way of detecting the presence of plains wanderers in the landscape. Historically, surveys for this species have been using spotlight counts, and on a property of this scale, it's really hard to cover the whole area, and also the bird is so cryptic and really well camouflaged. So using song meters is a great way to cover a lot bigger area and to expand our search for plains wanderers. We've got a great opportunity to put in some hard work and figure out a lot more about the species. With good on-ground management, control of predators and management of these grasslands, we can provide a place for plains wanderers in the future.
I'll just let that run out. There we are. Traditional owners acknowledged
and
there.
Yeah,
I was hoping that would actually tell me who produced that. Obviously, thanks to Bush Heritage for producing that. But I'd love to know who did the cinematography. I wonder whether it was Nicholas Rakatapar, but that was a really nice little film, wasn't it? And
beautiful, yeah.
Showed off everything really well. The question that Wonderlama had put into the comments was, the summary of it is, do we know historically, have we collected any information from the Indigenous communities over the range of the plains wanderer that is informing your work and any work going forward? Or is that a different project? Is that really something that somebody else with different skills and maybe different connections would be taking up?
Yeah, so Bush Heritage is one of their key focuses, is trying to engage and work with local traditional owners. So that's something they're really passionate about. There's not a huge amount of knowledge of plains wanderers that we know of in Indigenous communities, but there's a really great little a cave painting of one that we believe is a plains wanderer. It's got like a little spotty sort of neck on it. I think I can't remember the exact location that was found. I believe it was somewhere in South Australia, but Yeah, so there's definitely knowledge of plains wanderers in Indigenous communities. It's unfortunately something that we've not really been able to tap into enough. I know a lot of the stuff that's been done in the eastern states is working really closely with that fire burning practice. Some of the stuff that they're working on is their grasslands get too dense for plains wanderers. They tend to leave these areas because they're too thick. So they're working with traditional owners to try and manage the grass sort of abundance and thickness using traditional methods of fire stick burning, which is just such an exciting practice and such a really cool way to bring that knowledge into a project like this. So something we're really open to, and we're really excited about the work they're doing, and hoping that we can try and find similar connections and ways that we can involve that traditional knowledge into the work we're doing here.
Is there a commonly applied Indigenous name to the plains wanderer that you know of?
Not that I know of. We struggle because we're on the edge of and Ecology. We don't know if they've got a word it's something we'd be interested to know. I think that's one of the exciting things and lovely things about this sort of Indigenous language is different groups have different language, and I imagine there's a number of different words for it. So it'd be really lovely to find that out and try and use that a bit more widely. So that would be a good thing to do.
And that's something we brought up earlier on in one of the live streams we did talking about Indigenous names and applying any kind of common name to a bird, and that it's only a common name if it's widely used and widely known. Otherwise, it's not common. That's something that's going to be really exciting, I think, in the next phase of Australia's scientific awakening, I think, and the research that is done is that crossover and using – because in times gone by, we just did not collect any of that information because people just didn't value it. The scientific community, and it's not a criticism of the individuals. Culturally, it wasn't something any of us talked about. I was thinking about this yesterday. Someone was talking about Aussie. What does it mean to be Aussie and everything? And I looked back at some TV shows from the 60s and the 70s, and we were so shit, right? Because of what we accepted was important and who we viewed what was important and what we thought was historically important. We're so different now in our and that's got to feed through to science.
Definitely, and I think the scientific community, is really encouraged and keen to start to look at some of the ways that we can partner and value a lot of this history and bring it into the work that we're still doing now. Some of the traditional language words for birds are just lovely because a lot of them are based off the call. Like, they're really intuitive, and there's just some really lovely names out there, and I think it will be really nice to see a lot of that incorporated into the work we do and more into sort of just common culture. So I think there's, like you say, there's some nasty history, but I look forward to a better future in that and the way that we can support that in science and how we can better the way that we do a lot of these practices.
Definitely. Now, that film showed one of the methods that crops up over and over again in the conversations that I'm having with researchers, and that's the soundscapes.
Yes, we love them, yeah.
Now, is that project with the soundscapes up on Boolcoomatta aligned with your study? Is there quite a lot of crossover or?
Yeah, so I've started managing that program now. So that's become part of my project, which is really exciting. So they set that up. The video that you showed was set I think it was like 2017, 18, that they went and set all those up. So we've got a really lovely backlog of data that was collected while Boolcoomatta was in drought. And then in that, we've also got the really beautiful subsequent recovery. And we're able to map plains wanderer calls over that time, which has been really exciting. Yeah, the soil meters have just been a absolutely fabulous way for us to passively record their abundance and their behaviour. And because we know a lot about their behaviour, like we know that it's a female that calls, we know that she moves on to other ranges, we know a bit about their home range size, we can actually infer a lot about monitoring their calls, which is a really cool way for us to try and monitor these birds without getting in their face too much. So there's some really cool technology that I'm really lucky to be able to use, and we're really excited to see where it goes. Can't resist a plug. If you're interested in the soundscape technologies and how it's being used, go back and have a look and listen or watch the conversation I had with Dr. Professor Dave Watson from Charles Sturt University, and I'll be leaving some out, but also the seabird soundscapes with Aline, who's based in the UK, where she's analysing recordings taken at sea
of seabirds to go back and listen to that one. It's becoming a really important tool because it's cost effective. What I wanted to ask you about that, now that you're managing it, collecting the recordings is passive and much easier. You just go and take the sound card out and then you bring the sound card back. How are you doing the analysis? How much of that is AI and machine learning and how much of it is an individual actually listening to the files, the sound files?
Yeah, so we've got about 30 song meters out at the moment, and they've been collecting data since 2018. They collect for an hour in the morning and an hour at night, all day, every day. So you can imagine that's quite a huge backlog of data and also just a huge incoming amount of data. Yeah, back in the day, I think people used to go through it manually, but now we've got a really cool tech that we can use. So we use what's called like a planes-on-a recognizer, which is a sort of a call file that's made up of a number of planes-on-a calls, and then we can run that through the calls that we have and use nifty programs that just run through it, and then they spit out at the end, they say, we think this is Planeswander. And then I can go through, rather than going through however many hundreds of
hours.
Calls,
you can go listen to 3 hours of stuff.
Yes. And the calls look quite distinctive as well when you look at them sonically. So you can sit there like a series of little lines, so you can even visually do it. You don't have to sit there with earphones and go, I'm not sure if I can hear it or not. It's quite a low frequency call, and the song meter's better at picking up the call than I am at hearing them because they do sit so low frequency. So quite often I can see the call, but I can't always hear it. Yeah, it's a really good tech, and it's a really great way of analysing it. It makes my life a lot easier. It's certainly cut down a lot of processing hours for me, so I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah, and the consumer software that's available now so that you can analyse either the traditional waveforms that I think most people are with, but then there's also a lot more like a heat map representation that's available too. So it's much easier to pick out the frequencies of the call just by scanning through quickly half an hour or so of recordings rather than having to listen to them. So that's good.
It takes me more time to upload the files, like as far as size, and it takes me longer to do that than it does to actually go through and go, that's planes order, that's it. So it's the tech's fabulous where we're at the moment. It's really exciting.
Yeah, and then it gives you the opportunity, once you've collected the data, is that you can then crowdsource some of it if you need to, which is what Alini was doing because there were so many species of seabirds. It's much harder to write an algorithm for 70 species rather than one target species. So, she crowdsourced it, which is really cool.
The Victorian team's doing some cool stuff with that, doing some citizen science programs. So, it's really good what you can do. Yeah.
So, what's next with your part of the project? And you're taking on the audio portion of it, the audio monitoring. Is that an extra role? And the reason I'm asking is because I'm always banging on about how hard it is to get funding to continue the work you're doing. So does that enable you to move from like the study that's university based, but continue doing that work, moving it into ongoing funding with BHA?
So the stuff that I'm doing with the song meters has become part of the PhD. So I was very lucky that Bush Heritage and the ecologists there were happy for me to take that data set that was mostly unanalysed and use it as part of this project. So analysing that is really part of this project and sort of me trying to answer some of those questions that I talked about earlier. But I guess it's endangered species ecology is always one of those never-ending things. So, I hope that at the end of this project, it's not just another dead end for South Australian research. I would hope there'd be another student after me or a postdoc, or that it gets incorporated into a department sort of program, because it's, when we have these critically endangered birds, especially in ranges and that we don't quite understand, I think any sort of ongoing monitoring is really important to try and manage them better and ensure these populations are supported the best we can. So, I'd like to hopefully see it on go. Bush Heritage has been absolutely phenomenal. I can't thank them enough for all the support they've given me and the support they've given this project. So this project was their baby, their idea, and something they wanted to support. So I would imagine that, even after this project, it will continue on through their work.
Yeah, Bush Heritage did really critically important work in Australia. And this is no criticism of Bush Heritage Australia, but the very fact that they have to be as important as they are just highlights how shit the government is doing at this. Like how governments of all colours over 20 years have wound back their involvement in protecting endangered species and endangered vegetation communities and the geographic locations and just outsourced it to NGOs, which is dumb. It's dumb because it relies on, it makes the funding so precarious.
And it's double-sided, I guess. One of the system is tragically underfunded, and it's difficult to do research under these sort of the ways that we have this set up. And I guess one of the nice things about having a lot of this held in the hands of NGOs is that it's not dependent on government funding. So if we do have a change of government that has a change of priorities, that has a change of where they want to outsource these things to, those programs don't die, which is, I think, something that's really lovely about a lot of the NGOs that exist in Australia. It's lovely that these can be ongoing projects, but all of them are.
I totally agree with you on that, because that work is necessary, and that's where the really niche and let's go off in that direction kind of work should happen. But we've allowed governments, because Bush Heritage and so many other organisations have become very strong, it's allowed the governments to say, we don't need to do anything. They're doing it, which is the problem. We should have a dual track thing. And actually the institutions, the universities should be doing their own stuff too. We should have 3 strains at least of research funding and aims. But we don't. We've lumped it all into, the government have just said, we don't need to do anything on Plains Wanderer because Bush Heritage have got that under control, which is just so dumb, because the minute we have a interest rate crisis and people can't afford their mortgages, the government just say, what will we do? We'll take all the money out of conservation. No one really gives a shit. And Bush Heritage have got that under control. And at the same time, they'll cut the grants to all the NGOs by 10 or 15%. It's just dumb to my mind. It just here, I'm on my soapbox here. It just displays a total lack of commitment through government. All the governments, all the colours, all the states, they all do it, and it's dumb in my view.
No, it's hard to get work done when there's no funding. Certainly a lot of these projects rely on the generosity, as you saw in the video, of private philanthropy and grants from different projects. And there's a lot of us fighting for scraps and a lot of us competing with our peers for the funding, which is equally important. And it does hinder a lot of research. There's an unfortunate gap in Australian conservation research and the funding that's required to do it.
Yeah, we go over it in every show about everyone's trying to get money. And then it means that your project is competing against some other really necessary project that Bush Heritage might only have enough funding in their pot to do 10 projects, but there's 50 needed to be done. And you've got the birds competing against the frogs, competing against the desert peas, competing against the rock wallabies.
And then on top of that, a lot of soil work that is really important, nowhere near as...
So we really need to be putting more money in rather than trying to find ways to save money. But anyway, that's just me and my grumpiness. Again, putting a call out to the audience there. If you've got a question or a comment, or there's something I haven't asked that you think needs to be asked, here's an opportunity to do it. Oh, good old Llama's jumped in again. Oh, don't get me started. Fair income. New government. Tanya Plibersek might listen better to the last lot. Okay. My soapbox, you can step back from this, Saskia, if you don't want to have a bar of it. The way they are merging carbon and biodiversity offsets into a scheme that probably won't work is insane. They've had 9 years to do something good. They're sitting back, and what they've done is, which kind of dog shit would you like to step in? Really stinky dog shit or stinky dog shit? I don't get it. I've got no faith. And actually, here's my chance. Up above my head, Queensland Environment Minister. No, there. Queensland Planning Minister and Deputy Premier, and Federal Minister for Conservation. Toondah Harbour, that development is still likely to go ahead unless we all get going. So that's their Twitter handles. You can, through their Twitter profiles, you can find their Facebook and everything. It really makes a difference if you write an actual letter rather than stop Toondah. Right, that's noise. Write them a letter and say you actually care and that your vote may be dependent on what they do. For crying out loud, Bob Brown got arrested. The day before yesterday? Bob Brown got arrested trying to stop them harvesting swift parrot habitat, swift parrot breeding habitat. Hello? She didn't do anything to stop the development in known Gordian habitat in the Northern Territory. Sorry, Lama, I've got absolutely no faith in the change of government unless they actually demonstrate when they do the review, the new legislation, unless that's radically different than what we've got now. Rubbish. Anyway, there's my soapbox. I'm done with that.
Good to get off your chest.
No, but it's one of the frustrations I have, Saskia. Actually, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this without looking at a particular issue. But we're existing now no, I can't get off the particular issue. Did anyone see the tweet that went out yesterday where Albanese put the tweet out, I think, yesterday saying, now he's not at COP27. He didn't go, right? So it wasn't important enough for the Prime Minister to go, but the Prime Minister put out with Chris Bowen a graphic about we've signed up to the global initiatives to protect our forests. And guess what the graphic was? Cartoons of pine trees and fir trees. So they couldn't even put the effort in to have their comms team in Australia to produce something that's about Australian forests. Yeah, so there we are. Bowen is going tomorrow. But Bowen's not the Prime Minister, and that's my point, that it's important, but it's not important enough for the Prime Minister to fly over there, and that's what pisses me off. I think they're just doing the absolute bare minimum to look like they're doing something, which is the problem. Everything is about PR and promoting, marketing, about the feeling we're doing something. So far, Tanya Plibersek has done not one thing to ensure the survival of any endangered species. And people say, be fair, they've only just come in. They've had 9 years to work on this policy. And this is the policy that can't wait. If they do something in 18 months' time, will it be too late for the swift parrot? Because the extinction doesn't happen, they cut the forest down today and they're extinct next year. No, what they're doing now means that they're extinct in 15 years, but it's not reversible. Or do we accept that the good place to see koalas is in a zoo? That's the norm. They're normalising all this. All their press conferences have been in zoos. Tanya Plibersek didn't go out anywhere to do PR about the offsets and everything. She went to a bloody zoo. They're actually normalising the fact that it's okay, there's always going to be koalas. You'll always be able to go and get your photo taken with a koala. Don't panic. Don't panic. That's why I'm so angry about it and why I never, ever will give up on this until they do something about it. Anyway, there we go. Ask you, what haven't I asked you that I should have asked you about? What's the next step for you in your project? Let's get back to you. That's enough about me.
No, I enjoyed your run. It's good to say these things. Yeah, I think so. I'm at the very start of my PhD, so I'm really just looking at the next couple of years coming up, doing some pretty intense field work, trying to understand better some of the movement of these birds, some of the behaviours, understand the beds that they're living in. So I've got some big, long nights ahead of me and some tough days out in the field. So that's what we're looking at next. And then just, of course, just a lot of data analysis and crunching numbers and hopefully getting the research out there so that it's available for everyone. So, that's the next plan for me. We're heading out again next autumn to do another tracking period and another leg banding period to try and get a better idea of the populations and, how far these birds are moving. Yeah, it's all exciting.
When you say we, who's we? What's the team and what are the others in the team working on? I'm guessing, you clarify for me, that there's maybe somebody working on vegetation, maybe someone working on reptiles or something, and you all get together and support each other's work? Or is there a plains wanderer?
My project is I manage a lot of it and do most of the legwork for my project with a series of volunteers and field workers and helpers that come out and help me do long nights and help spotlight these birds for me and all that. So that's been brilliant. I work really intense with the ecologists that we have at Bush Heritage. They support the work that we're doing and try and get a lot of support through that. But like we were talking about earlier, Bush Heritage in South Australia or at Boolcoomatta, their focus isn't just plains wanderers. That's just the project that I'm working on. There's a heap of projects that are happening up at Boolcoomatta Station. So they've got yellow-footed rock wallabies, which is a lot of work happening there, and the reserve managers are working on soil conservation projects, and there's a lot of vegetation work happening. So there's always, whenever I go to Boolcoomatta and do my field work, there's always a team of about 4 or 5 other people working on completely unrelated projects. So it's a really cool way to meet other people and get to hear about the broader sphere of biology. And it's a great place to work, and it's a really exciting company to work for just because of that element and the constant research that's coming out of it. It's really exciting.
Let's be clear, it's not a company, it's a trust. It's a charitable trust. Yeah. It's governed by all those rules.
A better word.
Yeah, which means it's able to attract tax-deductible donations. Now, I think that was bushheritage.org.au/donate.
So go there.
Yeah, so if you can, it's a really good cause to support. And look, I'll just put it out there. I've been trying to talk to some of the bush heritage projects that are focused on the Indigenous land management techniques at some of the other sites. So hopefully I'll be able to talk a lot more about Bush Heritage Australia over the maybe next year. When will you be able to update more, Saskia? If we want to talk Plains Wanderers again, wouldn't it be good to get you and Dan in the same set of windows and maybe talk about what...
As I said, there's a team that's starting up in Queensland as well, starting to do some research there. So they also have a periphery population that we don't know much about. So, it'd be cool to get a crew together, talk Plains Wanderers Australia.
Is that out of UQ?
Yes, it is.
Is that out of James Watson's lab, maybe?
I'm trying to think who's running it at the moment. I think it's a pretty department-led as well. So I think QUT, and I think they're going to get a student on their project pretty soon. So there's hopefully should be some research coming out of there as well, which is really exciting. Yeah, I'm ear to the ground, and hopefully there'll be new research soon.
Excuse me while I write that on the whiteboard. Yeah. This is how it's done, folks. QUT Plains Wanderers. Okay, because it's very hard to keep up with everything that's going on when you're not in a university faculty and getting all that stuff.
When you're in a university faculty.
Well, look, there's so much. There is so much to get going. Actually, there's a good opportunity. If you've got a tip or you've got something that you would like me to chase up, news@thebirdemergency.com. That goes to the mailbox where I look for little tidbits and whatnot. So, do that. The last thing I really want to ask Saskia is, what do you plan to move on to after the PhD? Have you got a long-term plan? Well, look, I know it's really hard because it's 3 years, possibly 4 years of grind. And let's be clear, are you getting a stipend of 20 grand a year or something?
Yeah, I'm on a stipend, yeah.
Yeah. So for those of you in the audience, when's the last time you existed on 20 grand a year, right? So just...
How good are 2-minute noodles?
That's why I'm always saying you guys are the bloody heroes of the conservation movement, right? Because to do it, that means for 3, maybe 4 years, you are living like you did in first year uni when you were living at mum and dad's. I'm trying to get people to understand. If you think back, if you're as old as me, think back to what you were doing in 1984, 1985. And if you were living in a share house with 5 or 6 people, would you do that now? Because that's what you need to contemplate if you're going to do a PhD. So or you get to live under mum and dad, and hopefully mum and dad aren't like the crazy parents that you see on all the TV shows. While you're under my house, you live under my rules.
My parents are, my mum's up at Bonbon Station, which is one of the Bush Heritage Reserves, so it's all a bit in the family here. Yes, yeah. But to get to your greater point, it is, students do have it tough, but I think a lot of it comes from a place of passion. Like we're all incredibly passionate about our projects and incredibly passionate about the research that we're able to contribute and how that might help form better management, form better understanding of these species. And to me, it's a really important thing. And I guess if you look at it that way, a sacrifice that you're willing to make because it's really important to me. That's a general student sort of issue. But after this, I guess look at things like postdocs and other research that you might be interested in getting into, and different ecology positions. It's exciting to see how open the world is to you after you do a PhD, though. So as much as you do suffer through the years of study, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. There's a lot of opportunities at the end.
So let me draw again, labouring the point on one of my crazy loopy analogies. Do we really want our conservation policy within the country to be based on the passion of researchers and the goodwill of researchers? Do we want our conservation policies to be run like a footy cheer squad, which is what we're doing? We want these people to go all over the country and sleep out and do this and provide. It's your vehicle, right?
No, Bush Heritage helped me out, and uni also helped out as well. So, yeah.
Okay, good.
I don't want to paint like a super...
No, but the government didn't give you like 20 grand to maintain and run your vehicle for the period of the project, right?
Yes. No, that is, yeah. And
but they did give it to the person who produced that stupid fucking artwork over the weekend. So that's my point. That's my point, is that it's like pulling teeth for really important work. But hey, we need a new whiz-bang photocopier, not a problem. I'm sure they've got plenty of them. Anyway, that's enough. Saskia, where do you place yourself in the bird nerd spectrum? Are you a bird person, or have you become are you a plant or animal person who's got involved just because the Plains Wanderer project cropped up? Tell us about your relationship with birds.
What sort of twitcher are you? Yeah, so I would call myself a bird nerd. Yeah, I wanted to do a PhD that was birds. That was pretty important to me. I keep a list. Pretty adamant about it, like I'm sure a lot of your listeners are. So yeah, no, definitely a pretty keen birder. But in that also, like, I love vegetation and looking at how we can look at birds to understand a greater environment, because I think they're a really cool animal because we can understand them really well. They use a lot of, like, mammals use a lot of like smells and things and sense that we can't always see and perceive as humans observers looking. But with birds, we can understand them a lot better, and a lot of their behaviours make sense to us, and it's a really easy way for us to look at them and understand an environment and understand, what's missing and how we can help improve it. So, I think I've always been fascinated with birds since I was a kid, and I guess this was always was going to head into a bird-based project. Now,
you said you keep a list?
I sure do.
What's your number?
Oh, no, I don't keep numbers, and I'm really...
all right. That's the key point.
Funny about my list. I love talking to people about their list so much because everyone's got such a strict set of rules, and I love it. So I have to see the bird properly. Like, I can't just see it. So I went up to Queensland really briefly, and I saw your corals, and I was like really excited about it, but I didn't get to see them properly, so I won't put them in my list. So I'm really picky about it.
Okay, so you don't accept for yourself auditory evidence? If you know the call and you hear it, you don't accept that? Okay.
And I can see a bird, but then I have to get a good look at it as well. Like, I can't just get flyby and know what it is. I've worked in birds for a while, so I've got a relatively good idea of what I'm looking at. But I'm very picky about my list. I just think it's brilliant. I love everyone's different rules that they have for each themselves, and how they keep their lists, how different people like format it. I've seen the most amazing Excel spreadsheets of how people keep where and when and what they saw. So I think it's brilliant. Such a cool little thing that we've invented as a birding community.
It's one of the most interesting things about birding, or birds in general, is how people go about the activity. I'm a little bit different to you in that I reckon the other day I saw a particular honey eater, a group of them, and I saw them moving through, but I didn't hear them. But I didn't get a close enough look for me to be able to write in a notebook what I saw. Yeah. So that doesn't count. But if I heard a call that I knew, I would tick it. I would put it in. But I don't actually keep a list. But I will let auditory information support what I see visually. But now
I have different rules for different. So if I'm doing, I do a lot of bird survey for work, and I'm really happy to do like a bird survey and hear a call and count it there. I'm okay with some of my calls. So I'm happy to do that. But for my own list, no. I guess you just have to have your own rules for it. But yes.
How about taking photos, like record photos?
Yeah, I'm happy with that. Yeah, that's where I started. So I think it's a lot of place where a lot of birders start. It's quite overwhelming to try and find those minute details, especially in the field. So, I started taking this horrendous blurry pictures of trying to work out key diagnostics, and then you go back home and you go, no, it had the white stripe on its eyebrow, and so that makes sense that. So, and I think that's a really good tool, especially when you're beginning. I think it's almost, required these days. It seems to be part of the standard birding backpack.
So, how did you get into birding? And were you like me as a kid? Were you lying on the floor of the lounge room when you were 6 or 7 with your set of Derwents or Cumberland pencils drawing yellow robins?
Yeah, and then definitely flicking through the bird book. So I've been really lucky to have parents that have brought me up with birds, and very much an interest in nature. So I remember like being, I don't know, 8 or 9, and then school holidays, and Mum would set us little like tasks. Like she'd be like, okay, so for today you're going to make a bird guide of all the different birds that you can see at home. So we'd go out and be like, look, it's like a red-rumped parrot, and we'd write it down. We saw it near the grasses. So yeah, that's definitely what became a point for us. And then because my parents had that interest, they instilled that on me. They'd point out the birds that they knew, and yeah, it's just been one of those natural things that you're always aware of that. So it just becomes very much part of your worldview in your life.
So 2 things. Coolest mum ever. Okay, let's just get that out there.
I love that. She was smiling.
But you mentioned red rump parrots. So if you're a kid who was into red rumps and your mum was into red rumps, have you contributing to Rob's red rumpury project?
Oh, goodness, no.
Well, hang on.
Uh-oh.
Hang on. This gives me an opportunity to pop this up. There we are. Citizen Science Project, red rumpury. So that's your homework, Saskia. You're going off to check out what red rumpury is. birdemergency.com/red rumps will take you to red rumpury. And that's Rob is mapping all the known, and that's going back historically, red rump nesting locations. So if you remember from your childhood with your mum, a red rump nest hollow somewhere, Rob wants to know where it is, when it was, and so that's that project. So that I couldn't let that move on. What's your field guide of choice? And you can go historical here if you've moved from one to another. Tell us about that.
No, I'm always, and I think it will always be a Morecambe's girl. Okay. I have the same Morecambe's that I was using when I was a kid. And this book, I should have actually had it here next to me. It is so bashed up. It is just, I don't know what I'm going to do with it. So it is like the front cover is just falling apart. It's such an old guide that it has things like the night parrot is still written as extinct.
Or possibly extinct, yeah.
But I love it. And I was saying, I don't keep numbers because I just write in the guide I've seen. Any details. Yeah, this poor book is just absolute. And I've spilt water all over it. It's been bashed up in my backpack. I don't know what I'm going to do if it ever falls apart. I'll be a mess. But yeah, I've them. So yeah, been a fan ever since.
What you do is you get on eBay and you find a used copy of the same edition and just buy that.
Just sit there and transfer all.
My field guide that I loved dearly as I was growing up, Volume 1 of Peter Slater's Field Guide to Australian Birds, got destroyed, along with my Reader's Digest, Every Australian Bird Illustrated, where I was camping, and I went camping on my own I must have been 15, on a family property. Acheron River flooded. I was asleep when it came up over me. Don't camp on river flats. I learnt that. But, yeah, destroyed my bird books and my little eyepiece that I used to look at flowers and everything, and my binoculars. So I learnt that lesson in a very painful way because very expensive. Well, at that age, very significantly expensive. But
I've certainly sat with a hairdryer with mine.
Stuck together. That horrible when you pull them apart.
And a little wobbly. I know. I should just give up and book on, but I can't. And then I take it out. I do a lot of bird banding, and I take the book out with me. So it's covered in bird scat as well. So it's not a pretty book. Whenever people see it, they're like, ooh.
No, but bloody amazing. I reckon that's great. All right. So you're a Morecambe girl, but I'm guessing that you do have one of the.
I think we all have one of those, don't we?
That's right. Yeah. It's heavy, isn't it?
It's not a field guide, but you don't bring that in the field with you. Yeah.
But of course, they have put out the red one, the concise one, which is more of a field guide. Bucket list bird.
Oh, so many. Night parrot, just speaking of them then, that's pretty high up there. Oh, I could go on.
Have you had a close encounter with a night parrot? No. So you haven't turned up somewhere where someone says, "Oh, you should have been here last Wednesday."
I think we've all got birds like that, yeah. No, I haven't had that with night parrots, which is, so there's some out on a couple of bush heritage reserves up in Queensland, so I'm trying to shoulder my way in there. But there's some great research being done on them. But, all the birds are amazing. Mallee emu wrens is pretty high up on my list as well. They're now pretty much extinct from South Australia, so that'd be a cool one to see.
How amazing is that? Those two birds, I just happen to have an episode on both of those. So there we go.
What a good segue for you. It's like we planned this.
Yeah, and that South Australian population is one of the ones that Simon Verdon was working on.
Yeah.
That's what the Mallee Wren population episode is about. So any other sort of top of your bucket list there?
Oh, I should know off the top of my head. I haven't done a lot of Western Australia yet, so I really need to get a lot of just the common ones over there as well. So, yeah. I go through my list slowly. I think as a younger birder, I sort of think, I want to have this as a hobby that goes on for a while. I don't want to pick them all off too quickly and then have nothing to do later in life. So I'm just getting through it slowly. As they come, I don't try and rush it or push it. Yeah, just when it's right, when you're in the right place and the right time and you see them, I think that's makes it more exciting too.
I just checked my Twitter messages and Wonder Llama just sent me a Twitter message and showing that eBird has one record of the Plains Wanderer in South Australia, and it looks like it's perhaps around Murray Bridge, maybe Narracoorte kind of area.
So there's been a couple of sightings around there. eBirds actually, they don't place recent Plains Wanderer sightings because they're so rare, they don't pin them. Yeah, I think there's a few people that have put recent sightings in. They obviously have that data, but it's not publicly accessible. As much as we love birders, they do come in droves when they find that there's a good Plains Wanderer location. So yeah, I think eBird puts a bit of a limit onto the more rarer birds.
That's right, and Xenocanto of the same as well.
Yeah.
That's one of the great bugbears that I have. I'm a real casual birder in terms of that twitcher mentality. That's just not where I'm at. I'll go and sit in the park and watch red wattlebirds all day because they're so interesting. And I don't know if you've been following my exploits or my reporting on my local magpie family after the male I found dead on a.
Nice.
And today there's a new male. There's a new male.
Look at the picture.
But he seems to be submissive to one of the females. Another female moved in to help the existing female, another mature female. It's a really weird dynamic that I'd never heard of before. So
there's really cool research on magpie social behaviour. They're a really cool bird. Like you say, like a bird that everyone can just watch out their back window and get a bit of an understanding of bird behaviour and dynamics. They're a really cool species for that. And yeah, we're really lucky to have them so accessible to us.
Yeah, so I've got to follow up a lot more on the Australian magpie research. I didn't chase it down so much at the beginning of the show because endangered. I wanted to focus mostly on critically endangered birds. So we're moving more into that urban birds enjoying bird watching thing. So let me tackle the bucket list location for you. What would be your bucket list location? Is it the night parrot in like the Channel Country of Queensland? Is that kind of where you would want to go?
Like Christmas Island and all that, because that's pretty high up on my. I think a lot of the offshore islands are pretty high up on my bucket list locations. Just what incredible places just to see, like huge endemic animal numbers and just really unusual birds. So like Lord Howe Island and a lot of those sort of ones in Bass Strait are pretty high up on my list to get out to.
Yeah. Or Macquarie. How about Macquarie? That would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
Or South Georgia. Yeah. So many places. Yeah. Best bird. What's the best bird?
The Plains Wanderer. What sort of question is that?
I just have to put it out there. So
they are. I'm so biased, but they are the coolest bird. The weirdest bird. I don't know if that counts for anything. They're a really wacky bird, but I think every time I see them, I'm just always just so smitten with them. Oh yes, you're such a cool little bird. They look really weird. And their behaviours are really unusual, and they head bob and they run around. And to have them in their hand as well, they're quite an unusual looking bird close up. Like their eyes are bright yellow, but their pupils are like unusual shape. They're not like a circle; they're like a blob. Yeah. The first time I held one, I thought I'd squeezed it too hard or something horrible had happened. Like they're just a really unusual bird to see and work with. So
and anamorphic eyes. Yep.
Freak me out.
So bushheritage.org.au is where you can check out what Bush Heritage is doing. Saskia, where can people track you on social media or something?
Yeah, I don't have a huge social media presence. If your listeners are interested, I do keep a sort of an Instagram updated of sort of some of the stuff I've been up to.
You send me that. I'll put that in the post. If people want to check that out, that's cool.
The Bush Heritage is really good. They have the newsletters that come out and whatnot, and they put a lot of my research updates in there. So their Bush Tracks has just come out as of a couple of weeks ago. So there's a little update of my research on there. And they're really good at updating like their social medias. They're a lot better than I am. So, yeah, keep on track with them. And, yeah, you do tend to get my research trickle in through there.
Terrific. At Bird Emergency is me, and that's also on Mastodon now and that on Twitter. Just check. Later on, I'll have all the links. Saskia will send me what she needs to or wants to, which will be very cool. Last chance in the peanut gallery. If you have a question or a comment before we sign off, while we're waiting just for a minute, Saskia, thanks so much for joining me, coming on to the Bird Emergency. Wish you well. I really wish you well, and please keep us updated because people are interested in the Plains Wanderer. They love the Plains Wanderer, Australia's kooky bird, the kooky bird. Yeah, and look, just when your milestones crop up, just keep us in mind and let's try and get you and Dan together when you've maybe got a bit interim. Do you have interim results when you're doing a PhD?
Yeah, I need to get in and start analysing some of my data. So, yeah, hopefully in the next year or so we should have some vague outlines of what's happening and a couple of years of data there to sit on. So, yeah, it'd be good to have another chat and update you guys on how it's all going and what it's looking like.
Love to hear about it. Okay, bird nerds, don't forget the fight for #Toon continues to go on. Above me, the Twitter handles for the people who can influence the shoreline of Moreton Bay and the Far Eastern Curlew and all the other shorebirds who are the ancestors, the contemporaries of the ancestors of the Plains Wanderer.
I want to be one.
That's right. And what a lovely place to end up. That's been the Bird Emergency. I'm Grant. I'm a bird nerd. Saskia again. Thanks so much. See you next time.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks, guys.
Been a pleasure. Bye.